This is the second one, 2 days in a row. We're on a roll. I think this is episode 12 or 13. I know. And we have a lot to talk about after a recent, how do we say, turn. The tide has turned for Reclaim Hosting. I think we dug ourselves out enough to return to some of our roots. So I think we kind of reclaim the makerspace, Tim. How do you feel about that idea? And right now, what you are seeing, what are they seeing on the screen, Timmy? Can you take them through what exactly this is?
Yeah, so this is our new 3D printer, and this is only the start of a larger vision for the space. But and we'll talk a little bit more about your project in a bit, I assume. But part of the thing was the idea that we needed a 3D printer in the office in order to build part of a project you were working on. And so this is the one we went with. This is the Ultimaker 3. And you're seeing a live stream. You're actually in Italy and able to pull up a live stream, which is pretty cool. Normally, it would just be on the local network here. But it's a way to monitor the print. And I'm actually printing, and this is kind of silly, I'm printing brackets that get mounted onto a wall that will eventually hold up laser discs as in our Reclaim video space. So we're bridging the gap between the old and the new here. But and I'll throw a link in the notes of this podcast. You can see what the actual thing is, and maybe even throw a photo up here later of it in action. But these are brackets that get mounted onto a wall, and they hold a record up. But we don't do records here, we do video. So we do Laserdisc, same dimensions and all that. So we'll be able to mount Laserdiscs, a couple of them, and kind of have them sitting on the walls of Reclaim Video. So that's the print that's happening right now.
Now, this is a bit of a workhorse of a machine. You've been pushing it to the limits over the last week and a half. I mean, it's hard to believe we've only had it for a little over a week. But this is the Ultimaker 3. It's kind of more of a commercial grade printer, which I think works for us. And you've printed a bunch of stuff. So I'm going to stop the live stream of the Ultimaker.
Yeah.
And maybe we'll go to you and show us some of what you printed over the last 8 or 9 days. It's pretty cool stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was part of the thing for me when we were thinking about the videos, doing the 3D printing stuff. I said, I've got to ask some folks because I really want a printer that is reliable, something that you could just print and go with. I like the idea of, don't get me wrong, and we'll DIY maker aesthetic in a bit, I'm sure. But when it comes to actually being able to print parts, I wanted at least one machine that we could just rely on to print something. And this has definitely been it. We've had it a week now, and the thing has just been going strong. In fact, here and zoom in a bit to show you all. I'm just going to grab this to come a little bit closer. So this is a print that I did over the weekend. This was a 3-day print on the highest quality setting. It's just an ornamental vase, but it supports structure. And the thing went for 3 days straight and had no flaws whatsoever. So very cool stuff.
It looks like something
now the time
like John Carpenter's.
Say that again?
It looks like something out of John Carpenter's The Thing. It's so gorgeous.
It does. It's got that organic look to it too. And this things too, it can do 2-color printing. So if I zoom in here, this was actually a test print that was made on the Ultimaker, and it was left in the box when we got it just to show that everything was working. And this is a 2-color print. So it's actually got 2 spools of plastic that are, and you can do 2 colors at the same time. So, and the thing has been awesome. I also printed, I'll show you here, this is called a 3D Benchy, and it's a little tugboat. They actually have, as well as an entire social media presence. So you've got Instagram, Twitter, 3D Benchy is a thing. And so it's a really recognizable test print, and people do these all the time to get a sense of if the settings are on or all that kind of thing. And so I printed one in high quality as well as low quality. And you probably can't even tell from the stream which is which, because the low quality is still pretty darn good. That's going to be the low quality print, and maybe the best setting to see is right on the top there. You can almost make out lines on the top of the roof of that there. Whereas on this one, the thing is completely smooth, almost flawless. And when you even feel it, you don't get that sense of layers that you would normally have on a 3D print. The thing on the highest quality setting is really good. Now, the trade-off there is going to be how long it takes to print. So as I mentioned, that vase took 3 days. I think the 3D Benchy on the highest quality probably took somewhere in the realm of a day, probably 9 hours, something like that. So you're definitely trading off there in terms of quality versus how long it takes to print. But we've been having a lot of fun with this, printing a lot of different things. And in fact, you had a project, and this kind of spurred the idea of us getting back to it. Although we had talked about having a makerspace in Reclaim's headquarters here for quite a while. Even when we first took over the space, we had a couple dream them was that we wanted to carve out a space to do the kind of work that we were doing in Mary Washington. Isn't that right?
It is. And I mean, we talked about it even when we started first redesigning Reclaim's headquarters, that part of that whole front room is going to be a maker space, and we'd have a pull down garage door, which I thought was awesome. And then, but that didn't happen for, you know, both financial and other reasons of kind of getting that space together. But we did have that second office space where we started that has kind of pretty much laid as a pass-through space, almost as a storage space that you're in right now, that we actually could build. And part of what I was thinking when I was back in Fredericksburg last week was, or 2 weeks ago or 2 weeks, is how could I remake a game I saw, a DIY arcade game I saw in London at the Victoria and Albert Museum earlier in October. So basically, the game was called Line Wobbler. And like Tim said, we'll link to all that. But it was basically a video game made out of a door jamb, basically a door spring jamb, with a series of LED lights that you would basically use the door jamb and this gyroscope to control a little player who was a programmable light that would basically turn it into a dungeon game. It was awesome. So when I came to Fredericksburg, first thing I said to Tim was, I want to make one. And he looks at it with me and he's like, oh, wait, we need to print the casing. So he's like, does this mean you go down that road? And I was like, absolutely.
Yeah.
So we actually printed. You can see this is the top of the joystick, and I'll talk a bit about this because this was for me pretty mind-blowing. And this is the base, which holds the Arduino, which is basically the circuit board that's controlling the LEDs and giving it power and allowing us to plug in the gyroscope and control it. It's amazing. So the idea here was we were going to print it. So the second print, I don't think it was the first print, maybe the third print, I forget, was actually this case. And we printed it originally, right? Like just like you're seeing it here, we printed the basing. And then we were looking at the top and we were piecing the whole thing together. And one of the things we realized is the bottom is as it was. But this piece here, which holds the gyroscope, and I could take it off and show you that. Let me see if I can get it off. It's amazing. This piece here, which holds the gyroscope, and that's the gyroscope in there. The original one was probably a quarter, even a half an inch shorter, because the way I soldered it was not probably up to scope or standard, and so the actual pins were longer. So Tim's like, that's not a problem. We can go into Tinkercad and we can extend out, the parts. So we extended it out, which was so sick. He was also like, let's customize it rather than it say twang. Let's put a little doodad in here, like a woo woo woo, and that's where the actual speaker comes in. And what's cool, this is another insane, is Tim took the speaker, and we found a speaker in our soldering kit, which we learned how to solder to put on the gyroscope, or I did. Tim knew how already, and we realized that the speaker we had, which is this one, right, was bigger than the one defined that we should get in the actual print that someone made. So in order to make it fit, we cut out a piece of the cover and we sat it in the base. And so this thing, and I don't know how well you can see it, it's got a little bit of a doodad here, which allows the speaker to sit in here cleanly and still go into the base, which was sick. Seeing the whole space like redefined, not only we got a print from someone who designed it, but also our ability to kind of customize it for our particular, work. And then we went in, we got the Arduino. And what was amazing about the Arduino piece was we reconnected with George Meadows, who Tim and
Mhm.
George, created the original makerspace at UMW, which is the idea of reclaiming the makerspace. And he was like, "Hey, Arduino, there's nothing they can't do." And so I had some questions because I was still playing with that piece. We'd move on from the print to the actual getting the program to work. And he's like, "Well, you look at this," and it just felt magnetic because not only is the print amazing, but then
Yeah.
you start taking stuff like the Arduino, and then you start figuring out the circuitry, and then you and I are playing until late at night on Friday night before I'm leaving to figure out if we can get this thing to work. It was just magic, and it really
And
felt
I think
like
that's,
something else.
yeah, and I feel like that's, for me, what was the most empowering thing was the idea that we weren't kind of locked in by the idea of the kit. Like the kit was empowering in that it was like, here's the code, here's some basic plans, here's some of the stuff that other people had worked on. But as we got into it, we didn't feel locked into that. Came to the 3D printing, it was sort of like, okay, well, what if we want to do this? What if we want to do that? And even if we, I mean, I could eventually see down the line if you wanted to tweak the Arduino code and even own game for using the hardware that you already have and say, okay, well, now I feel comfortable enough knowing the code thing that you weren't defined by one single end goal, better than anything. The idea of that DIY aesthetic, the idea of the maker space is not necessarily that you're moving from start to finish in a linear fashion, but that really you feel empowered to say, well, what if we do this? Well, no, what if we do that? And kind of change up things on the fly, which was huge for us. I mean, the ability, I mean, for a while we were like, oh, maybe we need to like sand them down or do something. I was like, no, let's just print them with a different size, and it was just really rapid prototyping, which is exactly what the 3D printing empowers. But even just this idea that, you're not bound by what you bought, right? Like you bought something that really is enabling you to just change up things on the fly. It was just a fun project, I think, and a good test of us trying to really start technology and this stuff all over again, because it's been a couple of years for sure.
I was impressed, though. I was impressed with how quickly you got back into Tinkercad and you were playing with stuff, and I was impressed with how awesome the printer is compared to what it meant to play around that with 2012. And there was a lot of hours and elbow grease before you got anything printed. Like George was saying, you'd maybe spend 3 days and get a cube, and I like that. I mean, that was rewarding to see just how much. And then you can see other people taking the joystick and then building their own. Like they're modding it to build a kind of handheld that doesn't have X, Y, and Z, or gets rid of some of what the original. But I also like the way the project moves beyond just printing to also have Arduinos and the circuitry. And then we're in there, Meredith and I are in there, soldering the piece. And that felt good. And I came back to my mother-in-law's, and she just happens to have a soldering iron. So that's something I'm doing here with this Arduino to finish the speaker bit. And, I love it. I really like the idea of just having a project. And for me, it's always that. Like, it's always driven by something I want to do, never about the idea that there's a printer in a room, as someone has referred to. Like, rather, it's the thing you want to see done, and then how do you do it?
Yeah, and it's been interesting to see like how much things have changed. As you mentioned, we started working with this stuff back in 2012 with George Meadows at the University of Mary Washington. We built out a makerspace in the library. And so we were playing around with this stuff back then. And so I was really interested as we started to get back into it to go, how much has changed? How much is the same, right? So like in my eyes, 3D printing, if you're willing to spend the money on a nice machine, 3D printing has really come a long way in terms of reliability. I can just remember even the high-end machines, you were leveling beds, you were playing around with settings, trying to get things to work. The quality wasn't quite there. And now it really does feel kind of set it and forget it. In fact, I don't even have a computer attached to this printer. Whereas before, you had to have a computer always attached to it, or you were printing off a flash drive. In this case, you can just send something over wireless and it's printing out. And so even that, I actually have here, I'll move the camera so you can see, I pulled out from storage one of the printer bots that we used to have. And you can see it's laser cut wood. And this was completely built from scratch. In fact, some of the gears in the middle there, that black gear and the white one that are driving the plastic, those are 3D printed. And so this is using 3D printed parts, laser cut wood. This was a kit that we put together. And it's one of several machines that we relied on back when we were originally doing the makerspace. And I'll probably try and rebuild it, get it working again. But that gives you a sense. Now, these were a lot cheaper. These were like, God, I don't know, $200 or $300 versus, several $1,000s for a high-end machine. But again, that idea of tinkering and play and that kind of stuff, it's definitely been a lot of fun. And also seeing where things, I was glad to see Tinkercad was still a thing. Tinkercad.com is what we were using for modifying those files. It's owned by Autodesk, makers of like really advanced 3D software. And it's just a really easy, to my eyes, like it is the best way for someone to get involved with that 3D modeling aspect, because you can drag shapes and combine them together and they become a solid object. Or you can drag shapes that become holes and cut into an object. It's conceptually, even for me, a very easy thing to do. And so when we were thinking, oh, we want to have a design in here, we need to cut out a space, it's just really dragging and dropping shapes in there.
That was amazing.
And so I was really glad to see I was glad to see that was still around. And in fact, all of my old models were still in there and everything. So
yeah, I mean, that was amazing. Seeing you do that and just kind of tweak and redesign pieces of the joystick we needed. Like when you made it deeper and you dropped that top part here. Just watching you do that in AutoCAD and make this a little bit longer just so it fit, which for me is like, that's mind blowing. The other thing that was really cool is, so when we did meet up with George Meadows, which was a great reunion, he obviously has always been a big fan of the Arduino and also SparkFun and these little kits that, allow you to and take you through. And I have the book here and I'm going to work through it with my kids, like basically a book that takes you through the whole kind of circuitry and helps you fully understand how the Arduino works. And they're like $70 kits or whatever they are.
That's the SparkFun Inventor Kit?
That's right. There you go. And I just think that that's a whole new world for me. And I'm digging it because obviously that's what's driving the line wobbler game, which is amazing. But thinking now about like Christmas lights, like having a project where I can kind of play here in Italy a little bit with like, how do I get my tree lit up by this, little Arduino SparkFun thing we have and do that. Yeah. And that's like, just like that whole project oriented creating thing is really like wild.
And it's just incredibly accessible because it's like, especially with the Inventor Kit, you can use a breadboard. You don't have to do any soldering. You can just plug wires in and watch lights come up. You can throw a little bit of code at it and make things blink, And so, I mean, for anybody, you can really just work through those guides and start to learn things. And then you get into soldering. I even have over here. So this is the beginner soldering kit that you and Meredith were working on. You've got a couple of your solder joints on there. And this was a $20 kit that we got at a hobby store downtown. And this even included a soldering iron, but it also included a bunch of components, soldering iron and solder, and it kind of walked you through the process of learning how to actually make those connections on a board. But for the Inventor's Kit, you don't even have to do that. You just plug things into a breadboard to get started. And so I think it's a really nice way to understand what can be a complex topic when it comes to electronics and circuitry and things like that, and how, electricity flows through things, especially when you're using resistors and capacitors to kind of direct the flow of electricity and how much is going to LEDs and things like that. That's really like completely outside of my ballpark, I would normally say, but as you work through those guides, I think it becomes way more accessible, and it's very visual, right? Like there's an immediate reward there to like, you spend 20 minutes on something and then you make an LED blink and you're like, oh my God, that's amazing. Like I made that LED blink, So it's a lot of fun for sure.
I think that was for me, the hook is when we did get it working and like, a week's worth of work on and off. It wasn't obviously a week straight. And we were doing it off the side of our desk while doing other things, but like having that project running and then, it feeding other things was really cool to see that end game. And I've seen people playing around with Arduino. I think Dave Cormier has been talking a lot about playing with Arduino and stuff. And I've been following that very because I hadn't played with Arduino, I was fascinated, but I didn't have the context. And now that I do, like I'm doubly taken. The other thing is I love how that immediately one of the uses we found for the 3D printer was to print stuff for Reclaim Video.
Yeah.
So the idea that we can build like laser disc stands and have them hanging, and then I don't think it's practical, but even just trying to print like one cover for a laser disc. I mean, for a VHS tape, just to see if we can do it.
Right.
It's just trippy to me that. I mean, I don't think it's funny because I forgot how magical the idea of 3D printing was
Yeah.
in the time where we hadn't been doing it, you know, for other reasons, obviously obvious reasons, but like coming back to it, it's lost none of its magic.
Yeah, and it's not a means to an end necessarily, but it's a conversation starter that really, you know, you put it in the space and suddenly people perk up and go, well, what is that? And what could we do? And that kind of leads me a little bit to our larger vision for this space, because, you know, we started with the 3D printer just because we needed it for your project, and, you know, it was a good time to get one anyway. But we have larger visions for the space that I'm sitting in. This is one of several rooms within, I call it Reclaim headquarters. We run a co-working space in Fredericksburg, Virginia. It's a place where, you know, entrepreneurs, freelancers, people who have jobs but are allowed to telecommute just have a more professional space to work. And mostly because we're a small company and we wanted to be able to work alongside other people. And so we run that co-working space. And of course we have Reclaim before, but we had this other room that we kind of didn't know what to do with. And we were like, what do we want to do? And, you know, when we were trying to think through ideas and stuff, one of the things that even back when we took over the space we thought would be great was the idea of the makerspace in combination with the co-working space. And I think it's a really nice marriage, because you have folks here who are freelancing, doing their own business, entrepreneurs, people doing startups and stuff like that. And this is a space now where we can kind of spark some sort of innovation. You know, it's a place for people to really flex the muscles that they wouldn't normally have to do. You know, it's one thing to stare at a screen all day, you know, and whether it be in Photoshop or something else, it's another thing to like tangibly a 3D printed object that you designed, and suddenly something changes and you're like, well, what if I did this, or what if I did that? And, you know, it's a real way to spark creativity and innovation. And so I really see it as a nice complement to what we're doing with the co-working space, to have a lab space here that people can work in. And we'll have partnerships. We're working with George Meadows now to partner with the College of Education and actually have students work out of the space as well, which is really exciting to me, and really gets back to some of the work that we were doing 6 years ago at Mary Washington. And so I think it's going to be a lot of fun for this space, and it'll be more than 3D print. It'll be soldering, it'll be Arduino, it'll even be, so like I've got a Raspberry Pi here, which, you know, those continue to build in popularity. So this is an entire computer that I can hold in the palm of my hand, plug it in, you know, it has a desktop and everything. You can plug a keyboard and mouse into it and run an entire operating system from something this small. But you can also do really fun projects. And my next project, I'll tell you, for this is my wife has wanted a full-length mirror for our bedroom. You know, so when you're getting up and getting dressed in the morning, well, there are these things called smart mirrors online, and it uses double-sided mirrors. You know, the kind that you would normally see in, like, you know, noir films. You know, people like, what were you doing last night? Or whatever,
the interrogation mirror.
Exactly. Yeah. So like you use a double-sided mirror and you put an LCD behind it. You put an entire TV behind the mirror and you fire it up with the Raspberry Pi. So when you're putting your clothes on and getting set up in the morning and you're looking at the mirror, you're getting your calendar, you're getting your weather events and everything, and it's just this faded stuff in the background, but it's sort of this living mirror that's giving you data and information right there on the fly. I've even seen people hook it into, like, you know, Amazon's Alexa and stuff like that to ask it questions, and it would display answers to you on like a seriously magic mirror in your room. And so that's my next project. Awesome. I'm probably not going to go quite as crazy as the automated stuff with the, you know, Alexa and that kind of thing. But even just like being able to see what the weather and what your calendar for the day looks like as you're getting ready, I think is kind of interesting and a little bit magical for sure.
It sounds like a Black Mirror episode. Like you could take that smart mirror and totally like mirror, like, what should I wear today? And the mirror is like, don't wear anything. Something crazy.
Yeah, I think given enough time, every Black Mirror episode will become reality, right? No matter how outlandish.
Yeah, it's awesome. And the other, I mean, in closing, I imagine, is the idea of the makerspace for us, why we kind of came back to it, I think, when we did, is the co-work space is coming together. We did the reclaim video. This was the final space. And one of the things I think we both realized when we were at DTLT at UMW and working as instructional technologists was the maker, the 3D printer, but just that general kind of back and forth and sharing always brought other people in, always brought a sense of community in. And I think as soon as we reconnected with George, and even Carol Garman, who came by and dropped off videos. And it's funny, she dropped off the survivalist, what was it called? The SLR, the Survivalist Research Lab video from 1983, which was this group of makers, but they were making robots, military robots that were doing unmilitary things in 1980s up to now, which was a very kind of inspired video for what we were doing. But again, it was just idea of around a shared object like the 3D printer or the Arduino or whatever it is, it doesn't matter, of people coming together and thinking about stuff and sharing it. And if that space that you're in becomes that kind of hub, it will have served its goal. And I felt like when I was back, it had for me. Like just in the time we had done that stuff, having that at the side of our desk and just playing and thinking and coming back to it, it was such an awesome additional element to the work we already do, that it almost seemed indispensable once we started.
And we do so much in the virtual and the digital that it's really nice to finally do something in the physical, right? So like there's that nice marriage too between the work we're doing at Reclaim Hosting, and when it comes to web hosting and the web-based stuff, there's a real DIY aesthetic there too. And so I think it's a nice combination too, to really think like, okay, that's great. I can build stuff online, I can code, but now can I translate that into a board that I can hold in my hand and actually do some coding that can make physical things around me come to life? And so it's really fun to think through, what that bridge looks like.
Yeah, and it's fun because the DIY arcade idea, when I was at that London exhibit, one of the things they said is they wanted to take these video games offline. Like they wanted to put them in the space, and they wanted a group of people in a community to create them and play them. And that was kind of like they likened it to a punk rock scene of this whole emerging thing. And I think my next project is I'm going to get a car and I'm going to cut it in half and I'm going to build that Bush Bash. And so we're going to have half a car in there with the seats, and there's going to be a changing wheel or whatever you call it, like, it's like a gear shift. And that's going to be the joystick that allows you to drive and project on a wall. So if we get that one done, Tim, like that's next level. Yeah, it's called Bush Bash. I think we should start looking up the code now.
I can 3D print a car. That might be the difficulty. You wouldn't print a car, would you?
You wouldn't print a car, Tim, would you? That's awesome. That's the title. All right, man. Right. That was great stuff. I guess we can sign off. With you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks again for watching.
Yes. Bye-bye. Big fan, everybody.
Later, yeah. Bye.